The first thing Sarah Larkin heard inside the apple press was not the wind. It was scratching, slow, weak, uneven scratching from somewhere beneath the floor. She stood in the dark, with one hand on her swollen belly and the other gripping a rusted iron hook from the wall. The building groaned around her. Rain slipped through the roof in silver threads. Old apple barrels leaned in the shadows like men listening. Then a dog crawled out from behind the press frame. He was old enough to move like pain itself. One eye was white. His fur hung in muddy ropes. But when Sarah stepped toward the door, he planted himself in front of her and growled, not at her, but at the floor behind him. Sarah should have walked away. A pregnant woman with no money had no business feeding a dying dog in a ruined cider house. The valley had already decided both of them were beyond saving. But when she knelt and gave him the last bite of bread in her pocket, the dog stopped growling. Then he turned, limped to a stack of barrels, and began pawing at the boards beneath them. But what nobody knew was that half-blind dog had been guarding more than a place to sleep. By morning, Sarah learned that the apple press did not merely leak, it breathed cold through every crack. She woke on a pile of burlap sacks behind the broken press wheel, her coat pulled over her belly, and the old dog curled just beyond the reach of her hand. He had not come close during the night. He had only watched her with that one clouded eye, as if he had decided she was not a thief, but had not yet decided she was safe. The rain had stopped, leaving the building gray and dripping. Water ticked from the rafters into empty barrels. A strip of daylight cut through the roof and fell across the floorboards the dog had pawed at before dawn. Sarah pushed herself up slowly. The child shifted inside her, heavy and low. For a moment, she pressed both hands to her belly and waited for the tightness to pass. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please, not here." The dog lifted his head. She found the last crumbs of bread in her pocket, soft with rain, and gave them to him before she could think better of it. He swallowed without chewing. Sarah's own stomach cramped so sharply she had to grip the edge of the press frame. That was when she remembered the cupboard. Not the one here, but the one in the room she had rented with Eli Larkin before he disappeared. 3 mornings ago, she had opened it and found only flour dust. The coffee tin was gone, the lamp oil was gone, her spare shawl was gone. Eli had sold the bed first, then the stove, then the kettle her mother had left her, and by the time Sarah understood what he was doing, he had already taken the rent money and vanished down the south road. The landlord had not shouted. He had simply placed her carpetbag on the porch while 2 women watched from behind their curtains. "A woman with a baby coming ought to have family," he said. Sarah had family once. Her mother had taught her how to stretch apples through winter, how to smell a jar before trusting it, how to write every ounce of flour and salt in a little book so hunger could not sneak up unseen. But her mother was 6 years buried, and the only thing Sarah had left of her was a small brown notebook tied with string. She took it now from inside her dress. Between recipes for dried apple rings and vinegar wash, her mother had written one sentence in a careful hand: "What feeds people is never worthless." Sarah looked around the ruined press house, the cracked wheel, the warped barrels, the mouse nests in the corners, the black mold climbing one wall like smoke. Then she looked at the dog. "You picked a poor place to prove her right," she said. The dog stood and limped to the stack of barrels at the far side of the room. Sarah watched him nose one barrel back into place, pushing it with surprising stubbornness until it covered the same patch of floor he had guarded in the night. She frowned. Yesterday, when she had first entered, those barrels had been scattered. During the storm, she had dragged 2 aside to clear a space, and the dog had dragged one back. Now he was doing it again. Sarah crossed the floor carefully, testing each board with her heel. Near the barrels, the air changed. It was still sour with old cider, but beneath that came another scent, faint and clean. Dried apples. Not rot, not mold. Dried apples, like the rings her mother used to hang over the stove. Sarah knelt too fast, and pain tightened around her middle. She caught herself on one hand and breathed through it. The dog whined, low and strange, then stepped between her and the nearest board. "I know," she said. "I know it's weak," but he was not looking at her feet. He was looking at the seam between 2 planks. Sarah pulled the rusted hook from where she had left it and tried to pry the first board. It would not move. She tried again. The wood groaned, but the iron slipped and tore skin from her palm. A sharp knock sounded outside. Sarah froze. The dog's ears lifted. A second knock came, not at the door, but from somewhere near the road. Wood striking wood, slow and deliberate. She moved to the cracked front wall and peered through a split in the boards. A wagon stood beyond the sagging gate. No driver sat on it. No horse stamped in the mud, but the tracks were fresh, deep, and turned toward the apple press, as if someone had stopped there before dawn and walked the rest of the way. Sarah held her breath until the child kicked hard. The dog began to growl, not at the wagon, at the floor. Sarah looked down and saw mud on the boards near the barrel stack. A boot print, large, square-toed, still wet at the edges. Someone had been inside while she slept. Whoever had come had not taken her bag, or her notebook, or the rusted hook. They had stood by the same covered patch of floor the dog refused to leave alone. Sarah should have walked out then. She should have taken the road, found a church porch, begged for a place near town before the baby came. Instead, she tore a strip from her petticoat, wrapped her bleeding palm, and wedged the hook under the board again. The old dog planted himself beside her. This time, when the plank lifted half an inch, cold air slipped up from below, carrying the unmistakable smell of apples kept dry in the dark. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Sarah had learned two things about the apple press. The first was that the floor would not give up its secret easily. The second was that she was not the only person who wanted it. She worked with the rusted hook, stopping whenever the child inside her shifted too low or the room swam at the edges. The lifted plank showed only darkness beneath, but the cold rising from it was real. It smelled of dry fruit and something Sarah had not smelled since her mother's pantry. Food kept against a hard season. The dog stayed beside her, his cloudy eye fixed on the crack. When Sarah leaned too close, he caught her sleeve in his teeth and tugged her back. "All right," she muttered. "You know the floor better than I do." She needed strength before she tried again. So she went outside with her mother's notebook tucked inside her dress and searched the orchard. Calling it an orchard felt generous. The trees stood crooked and gray, their branches tangled like hands that had given up reaching. Yet beneath one tree, half hidden in wet weeds, Sarah found 3 fallen apples. Their skins were bruised black and yellow, ugly enough that most people would have kicked them aside. Sarah cut one open with her pocket knife. The flesh was bad, but the seeds were hard, dark, and whole. Behind her, the dog barked once. A wagon rolled through the sagging gate. The man driving it was broad-shouldered and clean in a way that did not belong near the ruined press. His coat was dark wool, his boots polished above the mudline, and a covered basket sat beside him. He stopped before the building and looked not at Sarah first, but at the door, the roof, the windows, and finally the place inside where the loose plank lay hidden from view. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Larkin," he called. "You gave the valley a fright, buying this wreck." Sarah closed her fist around the seeds. "I didn't know the valley cared. Gideon Voss. I own the provision warehouse near the church. Flour, salt, lamp oil, winter stores. Your landlord mentioned you might be out here." The landlord had not known where she was going. Sarah had told no one at the auction except the clerk, who took her $9. The dog came down the steps stiff-legged and stood between Sarah and the wagon. Gideon's smile thinned. "That animal still here?" Sarah looked at him. "You know him?" "I know trouble when it has mange." He lifted the basket. "I brought something warmer than pride. Bread, beans, a little tea. A woman in your condition ought not be sleeping in a cider ruin." Hunger moved through Sarah so quickly it felt like shame. The dog smelled the bread, too, but he did not step forward. His lips lifted from his teeth. Gideon climbed down without being invited. He walked toward the press house slowly, studying the ground. His eyes paused on the fresh mud near the doorway. "You've been working," he said, trying not to freeze. "In this place, that's a full-time occupation." He set the basket on an overturned crate. "There's a room behind Mrs. Bell's laundry, small but dry. I could arrange it today, and I'd pay you back what you wasted at auction. Wasted? $9 for rotten beams and sour memories. Call it 12 for your trouble. Sarah did not answer. Gideon added, gentler. You need to think of the baby. This place will be condemned once the county man sees it. Mold. Bad floor. No stove. No bed. If you sell now, you leave with dignity instead of being carried out by order. The words sounded reasonable. That made them worse. Sarah looked past him into the building. The loose board sat hidden again beneath the barrel the dog had shoved back while she was outside. Gideon followed her eyes. For the first time, his voice lost its polish. You haven't opened anything, have you? Sarah's hand tightened around the seeds. Opened what? He recovered quickly. Old cider houses sometimes have bad storage pits. Gas, mold, sealed jars. Things a woman alone shouldn't fool with. Sealed jars. Sarah had never said a word about jars. The dog growled. Gideon looked down at him with open dislike. That creature ought to be put down before he bites someone. He hasn't bitten me. Not yet. Gideon stepped closer to the doorway. The dog moved with him, blocking his path. Funny thing about old animals. They remember places better than people do. Sarah felt the child kick once, hard. Her hunger had faded into a colder feeling. You came all this way to buy a wreck and warn me about jars? I came to help you, he said. Some women are too proud to recognize rescue when it arrives. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. A bill of sale. Already prepared. The basket of food sat between them like a temptation and a threat. Sarah thought of the bread. She thought of a clean bed before the baby came. Then she thought of the cold breath under the floor, the apple seeds in her palm, and the way Gideon had asked about sealed jars before she had found even one. No, she said. Gideon's smile returned, but it no longer warmed his face. No is a dangerous word when you have nowhere else to go. He took the basket back. The dog barked sharply as Gideon climbed onto the wagon. He did not bark at the road or the wheels. He barked at the boards where Gideon's polished boot had rested inside the doorway. When the wagon was gone, Sarah moved the barrel aside. Mud marked the floor beside the loose plank. Not her mud. Not the dog's. Pressed into it was the square print of Gideon Voss's boot. Sarah did not touch the boot print at first. She crouched beside it until her knees ached, studying the square edge pressed into the mud. Gideon Voss had stood there before sunrise. Not near the door. Not near her carpetbag. Near the plank the dog had guarded. That meant he had come looking for something. It also meant he had not found it. Sarah took that small mercy and held it like a match in a dark room. The old dog watched her from the barrel stack, his head low, his tail still. When Sarah reached for the loose plank, he stepped forward and put one paw on the board. I'm not leaving it closed, she told him. He whined once. Then show me how. For a long moment, nothing moved except dust in the thin light. Then the dog turned, limped past the broken press wheel, and pushed his nose against the cracked wooden axle. Sarah frowned. The press wheel had seemed useless from the first time she saw it. One side had split, the handle was missing, and the iron screw hung crooked from the frame. But the dog nosed the axle again, harder, then looked back at her. Sarah dragged herself upright and crossed to it. The old wood was sticky with age. She ran her fingers along the crack and felt something smoother than rot. A plug, not a nail, not a knot. A small, round plug fitted into the axle so neatly that dirt had hidden it. Her mother's notebook had taught her to look twice at anything too carefully sealed. Food, doors, jars, hearts. All of them kept secrets in the place where someone had taken the most trouble. Sarah dug at the plug with her pocket knife. It resisted. Her bandaged palm burned. The child pressed hard against her ribs, and sweat gathered under her collar, though the room was cold. At last, the plug popped loose and rolled across the floor. Inside the axle lay a short wooden peg, dark with oil and use. The dog gave one sharp bark. Sarah carried the peg back to the loose plank. Now she saw what she had missed before. A small, round hole in the seam, hidden beneath old cider stains. She fit the peg inside and turned. Something clicked under the floor. The sound was small, but in that ruined apple press, it seemed louder than thunder. The stack of barrels shifted. Sarah jumped back, but the dog only pushed his shoulder into the nearest barrel. It rolled aside with a hollow scrape, revealing a square outline cut into the floorboards. A door, not a rotten patch. A door built to look like rot. Sarah's breath caught. Carved into one corner was a tiny apple, no larger than her thumbnail. Beneath it were two letters, worn almost smooth. M. Sarah looked at the strip of old leather on the dog's collar. The same letters had been scratched there by a careful hand. Who was she? Sarah whispered. The dog lowered himself beside the trap door, as if the question had tired him. Sarah hooked her fingers beneath the edge and pulled. It did not open. She pulled again, bracing one boot against the floor. The door groaned, stuck by years of damp and silence. Then it lifted. Cold air rushed up so clean and sudden that Sarah gasped. It smelled of earth, wax, old wood, and apples dried in the dark. Not the sour rot of the press house. Not mold. Preservation. A set of narrow stone steps led down into blackness. Sarah should have waited for daylight to strengthen. She should have found a lamp that did not leak, or a neighbor who would not laugh, or a midwife who would tell her whether the tightness in her belly meant danger. Instead, she tore a strip from the bottom of her dress, wrapped it around a broken chair leg, and dipped it into the little grease left in an old tin near the hearth. The torch smoked more than it burned. It was enough. The dog refused to go first. He stood at the top, trembling, and Sarah realized he was not afraid of the dark. He was afraid of leaving her to enter it alone. All right, she said softly. Together, then. She went down one step at a time, one hand on the wall, the other holding the smoky flame out before her. The stones were slick, but solid. Halfway down, she saw marks scratched into the wall, short lines in groups of 5, then a child's height mark, then another tiny apple carved at shoulder level. Someone had used this place often. At the bottom, the light opened onto a low cellar. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Many were empty. Some had collapsed. But on the far side, behind a hanging sheet of oiled canvas, stood rows of glass jars with wax-sealed tops, each wrapped in cloth and tied with faded string. Sarah did not move. Her hunger moved first. She stepped closer and lifted one jar. Dried apple rings lay inside, dark gold and curled like little hands. The wax was unbroken. The cloth was dry. On the label, written in brown ink, were 3 words. For hard weather. Sarah sank onto an overturned crate before her legs could fail. The dog eased down beside her, resting his gray muzzle against the cellar floor. Not triumphant, not begging, only tired, as if he had finally brought someone to a door he had been guarding for too long. Sarah pressed the jar against her chest and began to cry without sound. Then the torch guttered. In the sudden dimness, she noticed something on the inside of the cellar door above her. Fresh scratches, not old marks. Not the dog's. Someone had tried to open the trapdoor from above and failed, and beneath the scratches, in the same careful hand as the jar label, a warning had been carved into the wood. Do not trust the man who comes with bread. Sarah read the warning 3 times before the torch died. Do not trust the man who comes with bread. In the dark, the words seemed to keep their own shape. The dog whined at the bottom step. I saw it too, Sarah whispered. She felt her way back to the shelf. No bulge, no sour breath, no sticky rim. Still, Sarah did not open that jar. She climbed back into the press house with it tucked against her chest, the dog following slowly. Daylight showed the ruin again. Broken rafters, damp burlap, a wall blackened with mold. But now Sarah knew the ruin had been lying. Under all that rot, something had been kept clean. She opened her mother's notebook and wrote what she had found. 1 hidden trapdoor, 1 cellar, sealed jars, warning. Then, she added, Gideon Voss came with bread. Only after that did she choose a smaller jar from the cellar. Its faded label read, Windfall Rings, Late Autumn. She checked the wax. She checked the lid. She held it near her nose and eased the seal with her knife. The soft pop made the dog lift his head. Apples. Cinnamon bark. Smoke. Dry sweetness, preserved past every rumor the valley had told about this place. No mold. She placed 1 ring on her tongue. For a moment, she could not chew. The taste pulled her backward to her mother's kitchen, to strings of apples hanging over the stove, to a woman's voice saying hunger was less frightening when written down. Then the baby kicked. Sarah laughed once, then covered her mouth because the sound almost broke into sobbing. The dog sat very straight. "You want proof too?" she asked. She gave him the smallest piece. He took it carefully, not like a starving animal now, but like one who understood a rule had been honored. Sarah ate 3 rings and stopped. Her body wanted the whole jar. Her fear wanted the whole shelf. But her mother's book lay open beside her, and the cellar below was not a miracle to waste. It was a storehouse. Storehouses lived or died by restraint. So she counted. 26 sealed jars on the first shelf, 9 with fruit rings, 5 with apple butter, 4 dark bottles that smelled faintly of vinegar, 6 cloth bundles she did not open yet, 2 jars sealed in green wax at the back, each marked only with the tiny apple sign. On the second shelf, she found packets wrapped in oiled cloth. Seeds, by the feel of them. She pressed one packet and felt the small, hard promise inside. Near the rear wall, under a collapsed crate, she found another label tied to a shelf peg. For the woman who stays. Sarah sat back on her heels. The words did not say for the owner. They did not say for the family. They did not say for the proper wife, or the woman with a husband standing at the door. For the woman who stays. The dog nosed her elbow. "I don't even know if I can," she said. Outside, a child's voice called from the road. Sarah froze. She shoved the seed packets behind the canvas, climbed out, lowered the trapdoor, and dragged the barrel back over it. The dog helped, pushing with his shoulder until it covered the seam. A boy stood beyond the gate, no older than 10, holding a tin pail. "My ma says you bought the dead press," he said. Sarah wiped her face. "Your ma says right. She says nobody ought to sleep here. Says the mold gets in babies." The words had Gideon's shape, even from a child's mouth. Sarah glanced at the pail. "What did you come for?" The boy looked embarrassed. "Nothing. I smelled apples." The dog growled low, but Sarah touched his head. She had been alone long enough to know hunger when it pretended to be curiosity. She took one dried ring from the jar and walked it to the gate. The boy stared. "That from here?" "From an old jar. My pa says old jars kill people. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they keep people alive." She held it out. "Tell your ma I checked it proper." He snatched the ring, bit into it, and his eyes widened. Then he ran. By dusk, Sarah regretted giving it to him, not because the child had eaten. Because someone else had heard. The first jar broke after midnight. It hit the front step hard enough to wake her from a shallow sleep. Glass burst across the boards. The dog lunged up, barking until his voice cracked. Sarah grabbed the iron hook and stumbled to the doorway. No one stood outside. Only one of the cellar jars lay smashed on the threshold, its apple rings scattered in mud. Sarah knew at once it was not the jar she had opened. She turned so fast she nearly fell. The barrel still covered the trapdoor. The peg was still hidden in her pocket, but wet footprints marked the floor near the press wheel, and a smear of mud crossed the axle where the wooden plug had been. Whoever came had searched for the way in and failed. This was not theft. It was warning. At dawn, Sarah went to the orchard with the dog beside her. The trees stood in a gray hush, their branches dripping from the night mist. Then the dog stopped at the youngest tree. Its trunk was no thicker than Sarah's wrist. Around its roots, the soil had been scratched open. A white crust glittered in the damp earth. Salt. Sarah dropped to her knees and scooped it away with both hands. "No," she said. "No, no." The dog began to dig beside her, his old paws throwing wet dirt over his legs. Sarah scraped until her fingers stung, until the baby shifted and pain tightened through her back, until she uncovered one thin root, still pale beneath the poisoned soil. It was alive. Barely. Sarah looked from the salted root to the broken press house, then to the road where wagon tracks had cut fresh lines in the mud. Someone did not only want her gone, someone wanted the apple press to die for good. Sarah did not leave the salted tree until the sun warmed the back of her neck. Her hands were raw. Her knees were soaked. The old dog lay beside the young trunk, as if his body could keep the poison from sinking deeper. Every few minutes, Sarah scooped another handful of white-flecked mud from the roots and replaced it with cleaner soil from farther up the hill. She had saved one root. One was not enough to call the orchard alive, but it was enough to make walking away feel like betrayal. Inside the press house, she lowered herself through the trapdoor again, with a lantern made from a cracked jar and a twist of cloth. This time she did not go down, only hungry. She went down angry. The cellar seemed different now that someone had tried to break into it. The shelves no longer looked like a gift. They looked like witnesses. Sarah searched carefully, moving jars only after marking their places in her mother's notebook. Behind the green wax jars, half hidden beneath a loose board, she found a flat, oilcloth parcel tied with black thread. Inside lay a book. Not a Bible, not a ledger, a recipe book, though that word was too small for what it held. The first pages listed apple butter, dried rings, vinegar starter, and winter mash for children too weak to chew. Farther in, the writing changed from measurements to names. Widow Ames, 3 jars, fever in house. Bell children, dried rings. Father gone north. Coal girl, broth and apple mash. Do not let Voss man see. Sarah touched that last line. Coal girl, the letters M, C on the trapdoor, the same letters on the dog's collar. A sound came from above, not a wagon. Footsteps. Slow, careful, stopping at the doorway before entering. Sarah closed the book, tucked it inside her shawl, and climbed up with the lantern in one hand and the hook in the other. An old woman stood in the press house. She was small, sharp-boned, and wrapped in a dark shawl pinned at the throat. Her hair was white under a plain bonnet, but her eyes were hard and quick. She looked at the barrel stack first, then at Sarah, then at the dog. Her face changed. "Mercy," she breathed. The dog lifted his head. Sarah tightened her grip on the hook. "You know him?" The woman blinked, and the softness vanished. "I said mercy. As in, Lord have mercy on any fool living here." "You said it like a name." "I said what I said." The woman's gaze dropped to the mud on Sarah's skirt, then to the bandage on her palm. "You found something." Sarah did not answer. The old woman stepped closer. "Listen to me, girl. Whatever you opened, close it. Whatever you read, forget it. If there are jars, bury them deeper. If there is a book, burn it." The dog growled. Sarah moved between the woman and the barrel. "Who are you?" "Miriam Cole." The name struck harder than Sarah expected. Cole. The woman saw the recognition and looked away too late. Sarah pulled the recipe book from inside her shawl and opened it to the line. "Were you the Cole girl?" Miriam's face went pale beneath the weathering. For a moment, she looked less like an intruder and more like someone caught standing at her own grave. Then she slapped the book shut. "Do not say that name in this room." "Voss?" Miriam flinched. That was answer enough. Before Sarah could ask more, wheels sounded outside. Heavy wheels, official wheels, not Gideon's smooth wagon. A horse snorted at the gate, and a man's voice called, "Mrs. Larkin?" Miriam seized Sarah's wrist. Her fingers were dry and strong. "Hide the book." The sheriff entered without removing his hat. He was a thick man, with a gray mustache, and a paper folded in his hand. His eyes took in the broken roof, the damp floor, Sarah's belly, the dog, and Miriam, standing too close to the barrel stack. "Mrs. Larkin," he said, "I have a complaint that this property is unfit for habitation." Sarah kept the book behind her skirt. "Who complained?" "Concerned parties." Miriam made a small sound in her throat. The sheriff unfolded the paper. "Unsafe flooring, mold, vermin, no proper stove, no midwife in attendance. If you intend to deliver a child here, the county may have to intervene." The words landed like stones. "Intervene how?" Sarah asked. "Placement. For your welfare and the child's." The baby shifted inside her, and Sarah felt a coldness no cellar could match. The sheriff looked at the dog. "And that animal needs to be removed. Old strays carry sickness. He stays," Sarah said. "For now." His eyes moved to the barrel stack. "I'll be back with the county man. Until then, don't go tearing into floors." Last thing we need is a pregnant woman falling into some rotten storage pit. Rotten storage pit. Sarah had never used those words. Gideon had. When the sheriff left, the press house seemed to hold its breath. Miriam did not speak until the wagon rolled beyond the gate. Then she reached for the recipe book, but Sarah pulled it back. "No," Sarah said. "You told me to burn it. I told you to live. You knew Mercy." Miriam's mouth trembled at the name this time. He belonged to Margaret Cole. My aunt. She fed half this valley when men with warehouses locked their doors and called it business. Then why let everyone say she was mad? Because the ones who said it owned the flour, the salt, and the judge. Sarah opened the book again. Near the back, a page had been torn so roughly that only the top line remained. If Voss ever finds the lower door, the rest was gone. Miriam stared at the torn edge and whispered, "Then, he has already been here." Miriam Cole would not look at the torn page. Sarah held the recipe book open between them, the ragged line trembling in her hands. "If Voss ever finds the lower door," she read. "What happens?" Miriam's lips pressed thin. Outside, wind moved through the dead orchard, rattling branches against one another like dry bones. "What happens?" Sarah repeated. The old woman finally looked toward Mercy. The dog had gone still. He was standing at the open trapdoor, head lowered, ears forward, his cloudy eye fixed on the darkness below. Then he started down the cellar steps without waiting for either woman. Miriam crossed herself. "He remembers." Sarah did not like the fear in her voice. "Remembers what?" Margaret used to say some places keep a promise longer than people do. The name changed the room. Margaret Cole was no longer only initials carved into wood, no longer only careful handwriting on jars. She became a woman who had stood in this same ruin before Sarah, hiding something so well that Gideon Voss had not yet found it. Sarah tucked the recipe book into her shawl and followed Mercy down. This time, the cellar did not feel like shelter. It felt like a question waiting to be answered. Mercy moved past the shelves, past the green wax jars, past the hanging oiled canvas at the back wall. He stopped before a section of stone Sarah had thought was solid. Then he lifted one paw and scraped. Once, twice, a small flake of mortar fell. Sarah knelt beside him. "This?" Miriam stayed near the steps. "Leave it." Sarah turned. "You came here to tell me to burn the book. The sheriff came to threaten my child. Gideon came with bread and a bill of sale. If I leave it, he wins, whatever this is." Miriam's face folded with old pain. "Girl, he already won once. Then help me make sure he does not win twice." For a moment, Miriam seemed smaller than her shawl. Then, she came down the last steps, took Sarah's knife, and pushed its point into a crack between two stones. "Not there," she said. "There." The stone shifted. Behind it lay a rusted iron ring. Sarah pulled. Nothing happened. Miriam pulled with her. The ring groaned, then gave way with a sound like a breath being dragged out of the earth. A narrow door opened inward. Cold air rolled out, sharper than the upper cellar, carrying the smell of dry seeds, clay, and old paper. Mercy slipped through first. Sarah followed on her hands and knees. The lower room was not large. It was too low to stand in, and the ceiling beams pressed close overhead. But every inch of it had been used. Clay crocks lined one wall, each sealed with wax and cloth. Bundles hung from hooks overhead. Dried herbs, netted apples, small sacks marked by year. Against the far wall sat a wooden chest, not locked, but wrapped in 3 lengths of oilcloth. Beside it, nailed carefully to a board, was a map of the orchard. Not the orchard as Sarah had seen it, gray, tangled, half dead. This map showed rows of grafted trees, rootstock marked with tiny symbols, water lines drawn in blue, storage paths drawn in brown. Some trees were circled, some were crossed out. In the margin, Margaret Cole had written, "If branches die, save the root. If root lives, begin again." Sarah touched the words. The baby moved inside her, slow and strong. Miriam lowered herself onto a crate. She kept seeds down here, grafts, notes, food for winter, yes, but more than food. A way for poor families not to kneel at the warehouse every November. Sarah opened the chest. Inside were packets wrapped in oiled paper, labeled in Margaret's careful hand. Bitter gold, keeps through frost. Red mercy, good for drying. Widow's sweet, bears after hard pruning. Hill cider, for vinegar and trade. Beneath the packets lay folded papers tied in string. Sarah opened the first bundle. Names, not recipes this time. Families, Ames, Bell, Walker, Reed, Cole, Hennessy, Pike. Beside each name were dates, children counted, jars given, seed lent, work returned. Sarah saw no interest, no penalties, no threats of seizure, only careful accounting of who had been hungry and who had been helped. Then Miriam handed her another sheet from the bottom of the chest. This one was different. It listed the same families, but in another hand. Voss Provision Warehouse, flour debt, salt debt, winter credit, collateral accepted. Sarah compared the dates. Her throat tightened. They took debts from people Margaret had already fed. Miriam nodded. If folks admitted they had eaten from here, Voss cut them off. If they denied it, he wrote them deeper into his book. Either way, he owned the winter. Sarah's eyes moved down the page. One name stopped her. Eleanor Voss. Apple mash, fever, child ill, 3 jars, no charge. Sarah looked up. Who was Eleanor? Miriam closed her eyes. Gideon's mother. The lower cellar seemed to tilt. Sarah read the line again. Eleanor Voss. Apple mash, fever, child ill. Gideon was the child? Yes. Sarah sat back on her heels. The man who wanted this place buried had once lived because it had opened its shelves to his mother. Miriam's voice roughened. Margaret saved that boy in the winter of '72. His father repaid her by calling her unfit, mad, dangerous. Said no woman should keep stores without county oversight. Said old food would poison children. Sound familiar? Sarah thought of the sheriff's paper. Unsafe flooring, mold, no proper stove, no midwife. County may intervene. It was not new. It was a script. Mercy nosed something beneath the map board. Sarah reached behind it and found the old leather collar tag, cracked but readable. Margaret Cole had carved one word deep enough to outlast rot. Mercy. Sarah looked at the dog. His ears twitched when she whispered the name. He was hers, Sarah said. Miriam nodded. Last pup from her last litter. Too old to still be alive, if you ask me. Too stubborn to die, if you ask him. Sarah almost smiled. Then the sound of wheels rolled above them. All three froze. The wagon stopped outside the press house. A man did not enter. No boots crossed the floor. Instead, after a moment, paper slid under the front door overhead. Then the wagon rolled away. Sarah waited until the sound faded before climbing up. The paper lay in the middle of the floor, folded once. Mrs. Larkin, a dry room, a midwife, food through the birth, and $50 after. Sign over the apple press and all contents of its storage areas before the county inspection. This is Mercy, not business. G. Voss. Mercy growled at the sound of his name on Sarah's lips. Sarah took the paper back down to Miriam. The old woman read it and said nothing. Sarah looked at the seed packets, the map, the 2 lists, and the line that named Gideon's mother. Until that morning, she had wanted only enough food to keep herself standing until the baby came. Now she understood. The apple press had not been waiting to make her safe. It had been waiting for someone with nothing left to lose, to keep it from being erased. Sarah folded Gideon's offer and placed it inside her mother's notebook. If his mother lived because of this cellar, she said, then he is not trying to bury food. Miriam looked at her. Sarah rested one hand on her belly and the other on Mercy's old head. He is trying to bury the debt his family owes. By noon, the valley had begun to change its voice about Sarah Larkin. In the morning, she had been a foolish pregnant woman sleeping in a rotten apple press. By dinner, she was dangerous. The first sign came from Mrs. Bell's laundry boy, who stopped at the gate but would not step closer. He carried no pail this time, only a message folded so tightly the paper had split at the edge. My ma says not to take food from you, he said, eyes fixed on the mud. Mr. Voss says old cellar food turns babies blue. Sarah took the message. Does your ma believe him? The boy swallowed. My ma owes him for flour. Then he ran. Inside the note, written in Gideon's neat hand, was one sentence. Pride will not keep a child alive. Sarah folded it into her notebook beside his offer. Miriam had gone back to town before sunrise, saying she needed to find someone who still remembered Margaret Cole and was not too frightened to admit it. Sarah had wanted to ask her to stay, but she had seen the old woman's hands shaking when the wagon passed the road, and she understood fear could live in a body longer than hunger. So Sarah worked alone. She moved the seed packets from the lower room into 3 hiding places, 2 beneath loose stones in the cellar, 1 inside the hollow press axle. She copied the first page of the family list into her mother's notebook, then hid the original beneath the map board where Mercy had found the collar tag. The dog watched every motion. "You know this place better than I do," Sarah said. Mercy thumped his tail once. Near dusk, the sheriff returned, but this time he did not come alone. 2 men stood behind him with measuring rods and clean handkerchiefs pressed to their noses. They did not look like county men to Sarah. They looked like warehouse men wearing official concern. The sheriff read from a paper. Complaint of mold contamination. Complaint of unstable flooring. Complaint of unfit animal kept on premises. Mercy growled before Sarah did. One of the men pointed at the trapdoor area. "Floor's been disturbed." "I own the floor," Sarah said. "For now," the sheriff replied. That small phrase told her more than the paper did. For now. They walked through the press house, tapping boards, marking walls with chalk, circling every leak as if rain itself were evidence against her. One man tried to move the barrel stack. Mercy lunged so suddenly the man stumbled backward and cursed. "See?" he snapped. "Vicious. He warned you before you stepped where the floor is weak," Sarah said. The sheriff looked at the dog with cold patience. "If that animal bites a man, I will remove him myself." After they left, Sarah found 3 chalk marks near the press wheel and 1 beside the cellar seam. Not inspection marks. Guide marks. They had marked where to search. She did not sleep. She sat with the iron hook across her knees, her back against the press frame, Mercy beside her. The baby shifted restlessly, as if the child too could feel the room tightening around them. Sometime after midnight, Mercy stood. No bark, no growl. Only a sudden lift of his old head. Sarah heard it then. A whistle outside, soft and low. Mercy's ears trembled. "Stay," Sarah whispered. But the dog took 1 step toward the door. The whistle came again. Not a stranger's call. A remembered call. Mercy moved faster than Sarah had seen him move, limping across the floor and out into the dark. "Mercy!" Sarah pushed herself up, but pain clamped around her belly and forced her to grab the wall. By the time she reached the doorway, the yard was empty. Then came a sharp yelp from the orchard. Sarah ran as far as the first tree before she saw the lantern swinging between the trunks. A man's shape moved beyond it, dragging something low and struggling. Mercy. Sarah lifted the hook and started after them. Another pain struck, hard enough to steal her breath. By the time she could stand straight, the lantern was gone. At dawn, she found blood on the grass. Not much, but enough to turn her knees weak. Beside it lay a strip of old rope and a heel print square enough to match Gideon's men. They had not killed Mercy. That was the first thing she understood. They had taken him because they knew she would follow. The second thing she understood when she returned to the press house. The barrel stack had been moved. The trap door stood open. Sarah went cold. She climbed down into the cellar with no lantern, only morning light spilling from above. The shelves had been torn apart. 2 jars lay smashed. The oiled canvas had been ripped down. In the lower room, dirt covered the floor where someone had pried at the map board, but the original list was still there. The seed packets hidden in the stones were still there. The hollow axle above still held the 3rd bundle. Sarah laughed once, breathless and bitter. They had known where to search, but not how Margaret had thought. Then she heard it. A faint sound under the cellar wall. Not scratching, a whine. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the lower door. "Mercy?" The sound came again, thin and muffled, from behind the backstones where the map had hung. She tore at the loose mortar with her knife until her fingers bled. Behind the stones was not another room, but a narrow crawl space sloping away into earth. Cold air moved through it, carrying the smell of wet clay. Mercy whined again. "He knows another way," Sarah whispered. The crawl space was too narrow for a grown woman to enter easily, and she was 7 months pregnant. But the sound of that old dog, hurt and trapped somewhere beyond the wall, made fear smaller than duty. Sarah took off her coat, tied her notebook inside it, and pushed it ahead of her to keep it dry. Then she got down on her side and slid into the passage. Stones scraped her shoulder. Dirt filled her hair. The child pressed heavy against the ground, and she had to stop every few feet to breathe. The whine grew louder. The passage opened beneath the orchard, under a tangle of roots near the salted young tree. Mercy lay there, tied to an old iron ring, muzzle bound with cloth. One leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. His cloudy eye found Sarah. She cut him free with shaking hands. The moment the cloth came off, Mercy did not lick her face. He did not crawl toward the open air. He dragged himself to the far side of the hollow and began pawing weakly at a buried line of stones. Sarah followed. The stones were fitted too neatly to be natural. Between them ran a narrow trough, clogged with packed mud and roots. She scraped with both hands, pulling away black earth until her palms struck something smooth and cold. A stone pipe. Mercy pressed his nose against it and whined. Sarah dug harder. The pipe shifted. A bead of water appeared at the seam, clear as glass. Then another. Then the buried line began to weep into the dirt beneath her hands. Water changed the apple press before people did. It came first as a thin seep through the cracked stone pipe, then as a narrow thread running into the hollow beneath the young tree. Sarah cupped her muddy hands under it and lifted the water to Mercy's mouth. The old dog drank with small, painful swallows, his bound leg trembling. Only after he drank did Sarah let herself taste it. Cold, clean, not rainwater, not ditch water. Spring water, buried, and waiting beneath the orchard roots. She sat back against the earth wall, too tired to stand. Someone had called the orchard dead while its water still lived under their feet. By afternoon, Miriam Cole returned with 3 people and a fear she was trying not to show. The first was Thomas Bell, father of the boy who had smelled apples at the gate. He carried his hat in both hands and would not meet Sarah's eyes. The second was Mrs. Ames, bent-backed and hard-mouthed from years of not asking anyone for help. The third was Peter Walker, who had laughed loudest at the auction when Sarah bought the press. Mercy growled when they came in. Not at Miriam. At Peter. Peter stopped at the threshold. "That dog remembers me?" Miriam's face tightened. "He remembers more than most men." Sarah stood beside the trapdoor, one hand on the press frame to steady herself. "Why are they here?" Miriam took a breath. "Because their names are in Margaret's book." Thomas Bell looked at the floor. "My father said we survived the winter of '72 on warehouse credit." Mrs. Ames gave a bitter sound. "Mine said the same. Then he lost 10 acres paying it back." Sarah opened the copied list and read aloud. "Bell children, 6 jars, no charge. Ames house, fever, broth and apple mash. Walker family, seed lent, work returned." Peter's face changed at the last line. "I thought she was mad," he said. "That's what they told us. That she poisoned folks with spoiled jars." "Did she poison you?" Sarah asked. He looked at the broken press wheel, then at the dog. "No. My mother said there was always food here when the warehouse doors stayed locked. But she made me promise never to say it after my father signed with Voss." The room went quiet. Truth came in ashamed voices, in half-remembered winters, in old debts paid twice by people too hungry to argue. Miriam knelt by Mercy and examined his leg. "He'll limp worse now, but the bone is not broken." Sarah watched her hands move gently through the dog's tangled fur. "You cared for him before." "I cared for every pup Margaret could not keep inside during raids." Miriam did not look up. Voss men would come at night, claiming they were searching for bad food. They took jars, lists, sometimes seed. Margaret began hiding things lower after that. "The green wax jars?" Sarah asked. Miriam's hand stopped. Thomas Bell glanced toward the cellar. Sarah saw fear pass among them like wind through dry grass. "What is in them?" she asked. Miriam stood slowly. "Not food." They went down together. Peter had to turn sideways on the steps. Mrs. Ames crossed herself when she saw the shelves. Thomas touched one jar label with 2 fingers, then pulled back as if touching a grave. At the back of the upper cellar sat the 2 green wax jars. Miriam chose the smaller one. "If this is opened," she said, "Gideon will call it forgery. He will say Margaret wrote lies because she hated his father. He will say, you are desperate enough to use a dead woman's madness." "I am desperate," Sarah said. "That does not make the dead woman wrong." Miriam looked at her for a long moment. Then she cut the wax. Inside was a roll of oilcloth, dry as bone. Miriam unwrapped it on an overturned crate. 2 lists lay side by side, sewn together with red thread. One was Margaret's hand. Food given freely, seed lent, work accepted when work was possible. The other was in the warehouse hand. Flour debt, salt debt, interest, collateral, same families, same weeks, same winters. At the bottom lay 3 receipts signed by Gideon's father, charging families for goods they had already received from Margaret without cost. Mrs. Ames sat down hard on the stone step. "That receipt took our field," she whispered. Thomas Bell pressed his fist to his mouth. Peter Walker turned away, but not before Sarah saw tears gather under his lashes. Then Miriam unfolded one more paper. It was smaller, stained at one corner, and written in a younger hand. "Eleanor Voss acknowledges receipt of apple mash and fever vinegar for her son Gideon. No payment required. Child to be watched through the night." Sarah felt the cellar turn colder. Thomas Bell looked up. His own mother. Miriam nodded. Margaret saved him. His father ruined her for it. A board creaked overhead. "Mercy" growled from above, low and warning. Everyone froze. Dust slipped from the cellar ceiling. Sarah blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the shelves. A man moved across the press house floor above them. One step, then another. Slow, careful, listening. Peter leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "There's a back way, isn't there?" Sarah remembered the crawl space, the stone pipe, Mercy bleeding under the roots. "Yes," she whispered, "but if we run, he knows we are afraid." The steps stopped directly over the trapdoor. Then Gideon Voss's voice came through the floorboards. "Mrs. Larkin," he called gently, "I know Miriam Cole is with you. Tell her I have waited 30 years to finish this conversation." Miriam's hand found Sarah's in the dark and gripped it hard. For the first time, the old woman did not tell Sarah to burn the evidence. She whispered, "Hide the green jar. Then make him say one thing he should not know." The cellar became so quiet Sarah could hear Gideon Voss breathing through the floorboards. Miriam pressed the green wax roll into Sarah's hands. "Not here," she whispered. "Not in the dark. Make him deny it where people can hear him." Above them, Gideon's boots moved once, then stopped. "I brought the sheriff," he called, "and the county man. No one wants trouble, Mrs. Larkin. Bring up whatever papers Miriam has filled your head with, and we will settle this properly." Thomas Bell looked at Sarah. "He'll say, 'We broke in.'" Mrs. Ames clutched the receipt that had cost her family 10 acres. "He'll say worse." Sarah thought of the county's threat, the baby inside her, Mercy bleeding under the roots, and the jar labels written for a woman who stayed. Then she pushed the green wax evidence into Peter Walker's coat. "You laughed at me at the auction," she whispered. His face reddened. "Now give me one reason I was wrong to stay." Peter swallowed, then hid the papers under his vest. "I know the back way." They moved through the crawl space, one by one. Sarah went last, guiding Mercy with one arm around his ribs. When they emerged near the young salted tree, evening had lowered over the orchard. Lanterns glowed by the road. Gideon had not come alone. Half the town stood near the gate. The sheriff, the county inspector, Mrs. Bell, the auction clerk, men who owed warehouse credit, women who had learned to lower their eyes when flour ran short. Gideon stood in front of them with a covered wooden crate at his feet and concern arranged neatly on his face. Sarah walked out of the orchard with mud on her dress, blood on her fingers, and Mercy limping beside her. A murmur passed through the crowd. Gideon's gaze dropped to the dog, then to Sarah's belly. "This is exactly what I feared." The sheriff stepped forward. "Mrs. Larkin, for your safety and the child's, we're prepared to remove you from this structure tonight." "Remove me where?" "To a supervised room until the birth." "And my property?" Gideon answered before the sheriff could. "The county will secure it. Nothing will be disturbed," Mercy growled. Sarah looked at the crowd. "He says that because he already tried to disturb it last night." Gideon sighed softly, as if embarrassed for her. "You see? She is exhausted, hungry, frightened. A woman in her condition can mistake shadows for enemies." "She found a cellar," Thomas Bell said suddenly. The crowd turned. Thomas took one step forward, then another. "My family's name is in it." Gideon's smile barely moved. Old scribbles in an abandoned cider pit prove nothing. Mrs. Ames lifted her receipt with a shaking hand. "This took our field." "Mrs. Ames," Gideon said gently, "I am sorry for your hardship, but grief makes patterns where there are none." Sarah felt the trap closing. He was not denying with anger. He was smothering the truth with pity. The county inspector opened his folder. The report states the structure contains unsafe flooring, spoiled stores, and an unstable woman attempting to use preserved goods of unknown origin. The unborn child may be at risk. That was the first blow. A few women looked away from Sarah's belly. Gideon had chosen the one place she could be wounded in front of everyone. Sarah placed one hand over the child and forced herself not to step back. "I checked the seals. I opened one jar. It was sound." "You are not a physician," the inspector said. "She is a mother," Miriam Cole said from the orchard edge. The crowd shifted again as Miriam came forward, small and white-haired, with mud on the hem of her shawl. Gideon's face hardened for less than a second. "Miriam, still carrying Margaret's old fever dreams?" "That fever dream fed you," Miriam said. A ripple moved through the townspeople. Gideon laughed once. "Now we arrive at the madness. My mother did not take food from Margaret Cole." Peter Walker stepped forward. "Then, why is her name in the lower list?" The word lower changed Gideon's face. Only a little, but Sarah saw it. Gideon turned toward Peter. "Whatever Mrs. Larkin claims to have found in that lower room." He stopped. The silence that followed was larger than the crowd. Sarah said, "I never told them there was a lower room." Miriam whispered, "There it is." The sheriff looked at Gideon. "How did you know that?" Gideon recovered too fast. "Because old mills often have storage levels." "It is not a mill," Sarah said, "and you called it a lower room." Peter pulled the green wax papers from his vest and handed them to the sheriff before Gideon could move. "Read them." Gideon's voice sharpened. "Those papers are stolen." "From where?" Sarah asked. He looked at her. "If they are stolen," she said, "then you know where they came from." The sheriff unfolded the sewn lists. His eyes moved from Margaret's handwriting to the warehouse charges, from the no-charge food record to the debt receipts. Mrs. Ames pointed to her family name. Thomas Bell pointed to his. One by one, people began finding themselves in the paper. Then Miriam held up the smaller note. "Eleanor Voss," she read, her voice carrying through the gate. "Apple mash and fever vinegar for her son Gideon. No payment required." Gideon's face went white with fury, not shame. "You bitter old woman," he said. It was the second blow he had not meant to show. The county inspector cleared his throat. "The handwriting still needs verification. This could have been copied recently." Gideon seized on it. "Exactly. A desperate woman, an old liar, and a dog. Is this what we call evidence now?" Mercy lifted his head at the word dog. Then he pulled away from Sarah. "Mercy," she whispered. The old dog limped straight toward the wooden crate at Gideon's feet. Gideon stepped in front of it. "Get that animal back." Mercy barked once, sharp and broken, then clawed at the crate. The lid shifted. A smell came out. Dried apples, cellar earth, and green wax. The sheriff bent and opened it. Inside lay 3 jars from Sarah's cellar, 2 seed packets marked in Margaret's hand, and the missing torn page from the recipe book. If Voss ever finds the lower door, Move the green jar before he burns the orchard. No one spoke. Sarah looked at Gideon. You brought the proof yourself. For the first time since Sarah had met him, Gideon Voss had no gentle words ready. The sheriff closed the crate slowly. Mr. Voss, I think you should come with me. Gideon looked past him to the crowd. But the people who had once lowered their eyes over flour sacks now stared back at him. Sarah did not feel victory yet. She felt Mercy leaning against her leg, the baby turning inside her, and the whole valley holding its breath as if it had just remembered how hunger had been used to keep it silent. The sheriff did not take Gideon Voss away in irons. That would have made the story too simple, and nothing in Willow Creek had ever been simple for the hungry. He took him aside first, near the wagon, where men with warehouse credit pretended not to listen, and women with flour sacks on their shoulders listened anyway. Gideon spoke low. The sheriff answered lower. The county inspector kept turning the torn recipe page over in his hands, as if the paper might become less real if he looked at it from another side. Sarah stood by the gate, with Mercy pressed against her leg. No one cheered. That was the first thing she noticed. Truth did not make cowards brave all at once. It made them ashamed. It made them remember what they had signed, what they had repeated, what they had allowed to be said about Margaret Cole because saying otherwise might have cost them bread. Mrs. Ames was the first to move. She walked to the sheriff and placed her old receipt on top of the green wax papers. If that crate is evidence, she said, then so is this. Thomas Bell followed with a warehouse note, folded in fourths. Then Peter Walker. Then Mrs. Bell, who came slowly, tears already running down her face, and handed over a flour ticket so old the ink had browned. One by one, the valley began emptying its pockets of fear. The sheriff could not ignore that many papers. By sundown, he had sealed Gideon's crate, the torn page, the green wax lists, and the old warehouse receipts in a flour sack marked as county evidence. He also wrote, in front of witnesses, that Sarah Larkin owned the apple press, and that no man was to enter it without her permission until the matter was heard. It was not justice yet, but it was a door Gideon could no longer close. The county inspector cleared his throat. The structure still requires repairs before a child can safely live here. Sarah's heart dropped. Then Peter Walker said, I can mend roof boards. Thomas Bell said, I have hinges. Mrs. Ames said, my boys can clear the mold wall. Miriam Cole, standing beside the open trapdoor, said, and I can tell the difference between bad food and food that kept us breathing. The inspector looked at Sarah, then at the people gathering around her, and finally at Mercy, who had laid his gray muzzle across the threshold like an old judge. 7 days, he said. I return in 7 days. Those 7 days nearly broke her. Sarah did not sleep more than an hour at a time. She catalogued every jar. She wrapped the remaining seeds. She cleaned the spring pipe with her hands until water ran clear into a shallow stone basin beneath the young tree. Men patched the roof. Women scrubbed shelves with vinegar wash. Children carried broken glass away in buckets and whispered to Mercy as if he were the keeper of the whole place. Some families still did not come. They stood on the road and watched, afraid that accepting a seed packet would make Gideon's ledger swallow them again. Sarah did not call them cowards. She put the packets on a crate by the gate, with a sign in Miriam's handwriting. Take what grows. Owe no man for it. On the 6th evening, the press wheel turned for the first time in years. It groaned. It caught. Peter cursed. Thomas laughed. Sarah fitted the hidden peg back into the axle and felt the old machine settle into itself like a body remembering work. The first cider was thin and sharp, pressed from ugly windfalls no merchant would have bought. Sarah poured it into chipped cups. No one called it worthless. When the county inspector returned, the floor was braced, the mold wall stripped, the roof patched, the cellar aired, the spring running, and the dog asleep beside the trapdoor he had guarded longer than any of them had known. The inspector signed the paper. Sarah read it twice before trusting it. Safe for temporary habitation. Cellar fit for storage. Property under lawful ownership of Sarah Larkin. She did not smile until Miriam touched her shoulder. You won, the old woman said. Sarah looked at the patched roof, the half-empty shelves, the bruised apples waiting to be sorted, and the road where Gideon's warehouse still stood locked and full. "No," she said softly. "We opened something. Now we have to keep it open." Spring did not arrive in Willow Creek like a trumpet. It came quietly, first as mud softening beneath the orchard, then as pale green points along branches everyone had called dead. Sarah saw the first bud on the young tree she had dug salt from, with bleeding hands. It was no bigger than a tear, but she stood before it for a long time, with one hand under her belly, and Mercy leaning against her skirt. By then, the apple press no longer looked abandoned. It still looked poor. The roof patch did not match. The front door hung a little crooked. One window was covered with oiled cloth because no one had found glass cheap enough to replace it, but smoke rose from the chimney now. The spring pipe ran clear into its stone basin. The cellar shelves were labeled in Sarah's hand, beside Margaret Cole's older labels, two women's writing keeping watch over the same food. Gideon Voss's warehouse did not fall in one day. Men like him rarely vanished just because truth stepped into the road. There were hearings, arguments, signatures examined, old debts questioned line by line. The sheriff grew quieter each time another family brought a receipt. The judge from the next county ordered the warehouse ledgers held. Gideon stopped smiling in public before he stopped fighting. Sarah did not wait for his defeat to begin living. She planted first. Bitter gold near the south wall. Red mercy beside the spring line. Widow's sweet where the hill caught the longest light. Peter Walker showed her how to cut dead wood without wounding the root. Thomas Bell brought hinges and stayed to mend the press door. Mrs. Ames sent her grandsons with buckets of clean sand for the cellar floor. Some people came ashamed. Sarah let them. Some came hungry. Sarah fed them when she could. Some came with nothing but silence and old fear. Miriam told her, "Do not make them confess before you hand them bread." Hunger already did enough humiliating. So Sarah did not ask who had believed Gideon or who had laughed at the auction. She only wrote names, jars, seeds, and work returned when work was possible. Not debt, never debt. The baby came on a rain-washed morning while apple petals clung to the patched roof like scraps of white cloth. Miriam was there. Mrs. Bell boiled water. Mercy lay outside the door and refused to move, though thunder shook the valley and every bone in his old body must have ached. When the child cried, thin and furious and alive, the dog lifted his gray muzzle and gave one hoarse bark toward the orchard. Sarah named the girl Margaret, not because the past needed worship, Miriam said, wiping her eyes with the corner of her shawl, but because some names deserve to be spoken without fear. By early summer, the sign went up over the door. Margaret's Press and Cellar. Peter carved it from a board that had once covered the hidden trapdoor. Under the name, Sarah painted smaller words with a careful hand. No hungry family turned away. The first basket left the press before the apples were even ripe. It held seed packets, vinegar starter, dried rings from the last sealed jars, and a copy of Margaret's instructions for keeping food without owing a warehouse. A widow from the North Ridge carried it home against her chest as if it were a child. Mercy watched from the threshold. He had grown thinner, if that was possible, and his blind eye had gone fully white. But he still knew every footstep that belonged near the cellar and every stranger who paused too long by the barrels. Children brought him crusts. He accepted them with solemn dignity, then slept with his chin across the trapdoor seam. One evening, Sarah sat beside him, while little Margaret slept in a basket near the warm press stones. Outside, the orchard breathed in the dark. The spring water moved under the roots. Somewhere down in the valley, the warehouse bell rang for closing. But fewer people hurried toward it now. Miriam lowered herself onto the step beside Sarah. "Do you ever think of leaving?" Sarah looked at the cracked wheel, the labeled shelves, the baby's small fist curled above the blanket, and the old dog guarding the door Margaret Cole had hidden for the woman who stayed. "I was left," Sarah said. "That is not the same as leaving." The next morning, wind loosened the first apple blossoms, and they fell over the repaired roof, over the stone basin, over Mercy's back as he slept in the sun. The valley had once called the apple press a dead place. But life does not always return with applause. Sometimes it returns as clean water under buried stone. A child, breathing in a room once condemned. A mother writing names without debts beside them, and an old half-blind dog resting at the door of a cellar he no longer had to guard alone.